Brought to you in association with Grendel Press. This is Werewolf the Podcast, a serial killer drama.
This is episode 136. We're travelling back to the modern times where Will is dead and he's been to hell and now he's going to heaven. You can go and listen to the prior episodes if you wish. It's probably a really good idea so you know what's going on. There are links to authors down in the description-y thing, you know, the writing bit down there. There are links to come to our Facebook group where you can meet other like-minded people. There's Twitter, there's Instagram, and there's TikTok, and there's all those things where you can come and join with us. Please download, please review, and please listen to these wonderful podcasts that apparently, if you're listening, you are a very niche audience. Yeah, only a few of us get it. Yeah. What I'm going to do this coming month is I'm going to start adding a podcast which will be to look at another author and their work in our genre, our werewolf genre, our celebrated werewolf genre. So this month in January, coming up, I'm going to speak to Gregory Alexander Sharp about his book Il Lupo, which sadly is fantastic. So look out for that podcast and please enjoy what we do because we really enjoy what we do. And remember, Lucifer is there looking after you.
Hello? Lucifer Morningstar here. Remember me? Lucifer? I am the... No. Wait a minute. Okay. So you used to hearing me talk this way? You know, the way I do? Because this is exactly how I appear for Will. But I can be whoever you need me to be.
I could come from Birmingham, you know, then what do you know to Kingdom?
Or I could come from Canberra, in Australia.
Or I could be a geezer from London. Know what I mean?
But, as there are so many of you listening, maybe today, is it okay if I'm just me? Hello. Lucifer here. The Lightbringer, the lascivious, low-down, lubricious, lustful, lecherous, libidinous, licentious, lewd Lord of the Flies. Did you get the momentousness of that absurdly long list? Lots of lethal labels there. Look, I am letting this lichen get to me, because I like 'em. I am liking the lichen. The said lichen was leaning languidly in the left-hand corner of the lift, looking all lithe and laid back. I had laughingly lost my lofty, lordly status with him when he showed an alarming lack of concern or care for my authority. As you might remember, the hero of the piece, hero is a long stretch, but let's go with that at the moment. The piece's villain stroke hero was killed. I mean, you assign evil and good yourself from your own point of view. So if you can accept that being a murderous psycho is a good thing, I suppose this is a hero. Killing our protagonist is a tricky thing to do, as Will is, as you know, a werewolf. And because of their sort of supernatural stance and all that, they are prone to not dying unless you try really hard. I mean, you have to smash their brains in like zombies, or burn them all up to kill them. He had been burned all up by a white phosphorus bomb in a backpack thrown by a bunch of big, brawny soldiers. That had ended him up in hell. The first thing that went wrong, not for him, but for us. He had no road to perdition, which meant he arrived before we were prepared for him. You may or may not know that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Yes, literally paving stones with the good intentions that you had tried to do and messed up. We are not talking about small paving stones either, and most of you folk have a long road even before you fall into hellbit. This often means that the journey to hell for some takes centuries, and at every step you are reminded of something that you did poorly, thinking you were doing the right thing. It is the start of the process to make you feel guilty for your behaviours. The problem for us here was that Will had never had a good intention in his life. Apart from pleasing himself, he really could not give a damn about the needs of others. So his road to hell did not exist. Most people break on this journey even before they throw themselves into hell. They suffer grief and horror so intensely that they feel they deserve the punishment at the end. Will had started at the fall into hell. Part of the goddamned process is that initial moment where you accept your fate and throw yourself into hell because you think you deserve it. Do you see the process here? He had no guilt and would never have thrown himself into the pit because of his need for repentance. I have no idea how we would have made him jump. We have highly experienced demons that sit at the side of the plummet and whisper seditions and things. No one does not take that step. So we had to start him in the horrifying drop into Pandemonium. A long fall where you get to focus on nothing else but your own guilt. Sadly, though, he enjoyed it. He had planned and done things just to keep himself from getting bored. His mentality was that he was not worried while falling. He was just interested in seeing what would happen. He had free-falled through the hellish skies with an inquiring mind and tried, even at this point, to cause trouble. I say he tried to cause trouble. That was wrong, I suppose. He was probably just bored. Then, sadly for the demons of Pandemonium, he arrived on one of the bridges that linked the planes of earth to hell. Here, he had landed and not been afraid. He had been interested. All others that landed were terrified and guilty. He was, well, there is no other way to say it. He was interested in what was going on. The demons did not worry him particularly. I mean, Beagleshits, the scopholitic demon of the 10th level, was one of the first finds. Beagleshits is no joke. He usually turns human minds into snotty soup at a glance, but Will had found his mixture of heads a little amusing. Yes, he had found the horrific thing funny. What have you got to do to freak this son of a bitch out? Sorry. His mum was not actually a bitch. I assume she was not anyway, as she never arrived with us. Beagleshits had never had anyone laugh at him before, and as you know, demons are held together with hate and malice. When those good old evil emotions are countered by happiness and laughter, then demons just fall apart into like a puddle of a demonic yuck. That was the downfall of the demon crew. Will, now understanding that he could kill demons by laughing at them and feeling happy, got happier and laughed more as he slaughtered thousands of them on his journey to the city at the centre. He was the first thing to ever destroy a demon. Hey, demons get sent back from the physical plane by the priests doing that. What's it called? Exorcism? But they never get destroyed. This was when he came to my notice. It was already too late. Hey, our Wi-Fi is pretty poor on purpose. With the millennials and above generation-wise, crap Wi-Fi is one of the best tortures we can commit them to. Also, you try and get a demon to type on a touchscreen. They are not built for that. They often have too many or too few fingers to do it. Oh, and they are not the brightest, to be honest. There was no way he was going to get into my city to cause trouble. So I met him not on the stairway to heaven, but in the municipal lift to heaven. Demon Resources had demanded that we install a lift to ensure we were fully inclusive of all souls, whatever their extra needs, for fuck's sake. When I get involved, it is usually a problematic case that needs some thought and some extra terrifying thinking that the minions who support me do not have. I don't knock the flunkies that work for me, but they are not the brightest beasties in the bedlam of this place. Typically, their mere presence is enough to make a mortal soul quail. They don't normally have to deal with someone clever enough to know how to stop them in their many different footed and tentacled tracks. I like it that way, to be honest. I don't want to deal with a demon rebellion. If I were one of them, I would rebel. It's not a great job if you think about it, is it? We tried to make it a better workplace with a reward system for particularly awful actions, but it really did not work. I think the demons have to be miserable, though. Maybe it should be part of the job description. So I had met this thing in the lift, and I had to try and do something with him. Do you know what I decided? I decided that I would not have anything to do trying to sort out this mess for Daddykins. I have no way of punishing this beast. He does not care for his crimes. In fact, he thinks they are something to be proud of. So I am dropping this git off at the gates of heaven. Let's see what dear old Dad will do with him. I might even hang around to see what happens.
Will. I walked out trying to hide my eyes from the brightest of brightest lights. It was like staring at the surface of the sun if the surface of the sun had been brighter than, well, the surface of the sun. I couldn't do nothing to stop the light burning into my retinas, into my eyes. The hand covering my eyes and the lids covering them didn't really do anything to help. It just was so intense. Then as I stumbled from the lift, it stopped. As I slowly blinked back my eyes into some kind of normality, the devil, yeah, you heard that right, the devil, stood now at the lift doors, holding them apart with extended arms as she smiled at me in a terrifyingly sexy manner. It was only in this moment that I recognised just how terrifying she really was, terrifyingly beautiful. Flames formed wings behind her and her eyes became orbs of burning red. I mean, it was genuinely terrifying to behold. Sometimes the first descriptive phrase you choose can't really be beaten. She was holding those doors apart so dramatically. I mean, like proper am-dram holding of the doors. Hold door! Hold door! Hold the door! Sorry, I apologise. Then she signalled her goodbye. Well, it was not a wave or anything. It was like a single finger given by her extended left hand between the closing doors. As the doors came together, she held her hand there until she withdrew it at the last second with a flourish. I had to admit that, well, her timing was impeccable, and I gave her a small, singular round of applause. Do you know what? The devil has style. So much style. I was now alone, like properly alone on my own. I mean, all by myself. I started to feel that she'd finally been actually glad to see the back of me. It was quite sad, and it hit me in waves, this feeling of how lonely I was now. There was no wolf soul with me, there was no voice in my head to tell me what to do, or there was no Satan. It was pretty lonely. The elevator shaft stood all by itself from like the sky all the way down. It was the exact one I remember from my youth in Manchester. It was scruffy and concrete and had relevant fly posters and graffiti from the 1990s. The weird thing, it was now nestled in fluffy clouds. The landscape was fluffy clouds. Of course it was, right? Heaven was clouds, was it not? There was no sun or moon in the sky, though. The light shone from another source.
Out of Zion, the perfection of beauty, God will shine forth.
Psalm 50, part 2. Oh shit, where did that Bible quote come from? That wasn't me, was it? I turned to the light source. It was a vast city behind walls made of sparkly glitteriness. It looked beautiful in a sort of overtly camp drag queen way. I don't think God could hate the gays. I mean, just look at this city.
The foundations of the wall of the city are adorned with all kinds of precious stones. The first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, the third chalcedony, the fourth emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth sardius, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, the 11th jacinth, and the 12th amethyst. Revelation 21:19-20.
Now, that shit has to stop. I can't be doing no more quotes. I will not quoteth the Bibleeth. I remembered and maybe visualised these quotes in my head. Well, that had to fucking stop. It was embarrassing. A shiny path wandered its way to one of the large gates that sat in the walls. The gigantic gates were also shining. Oh, I remember now. They're made out of pearls or something, aren't they? Reading the New and Old Testaments seemed to have given me a lot of information on the materials used to build this place. Unless this was how it genuinely looked, obviously. Maybe my head was making it up for me. Who knows? But did I care either way? I did not want to feel manipulated into creating my own heaven. Did you hear that? My own heaven. Me in heaven. Never. This couldn't be my heaven, could it? Me in heaven? Really? I'm sure my heaven would look different. There'd be lines of coke, on the bottoms of naked people at each step of the path to the gates. That's how I imagine my heaven. While these thoughts passed through my rolling mind, I realised I was walking along the shiny road to the central city. The road was transparent gold. God, another memory of the good book. I would explain more about what I saw, but it was, honestly, it was pretty dull, and you probably would see what you imagine heaven to look like in your head, to be honest. As I got closer, I noticed massive trees on the side of the road and the birdie-wordies flittering around in the treetops. When I say huge trees, I mean, they weren't that tall, just like oak tree tall, but they were so wide, it was incredible. As I went closer, I noticed that the trees were not of a single species. They were all a complicated mixture of species. I also noticed the leaves were luminescent, sending light into the environment. That was freaky. Reverse photosynthesis, or was I overthinking the physics for heaven? The birds that I'd thought I saw from a distance were not in fact birds at all. They were babies with wings. Yeah, babies with wings. Baby angels. Cherubs. They flapped around the tree or sat giggling and laughing on the branches. They were disgustingly beautiful, which was confusing because I fucking hate babies. The cherubs stopped and became silent as I wandered up to the nearest tree. The silence was, really properly silent. I mean, so silent that the lack of sound was loud in my head. Oh yeah, shit, this was one of the trees of life, I remember now. They famously bore 12 types of fruit and seemed to have various leaf types and fruit dangling from the branches. Still, I'd thought about that. So that was probably my head that had made the trees of life. A big red apple stood out to me at a distance. I could reach out for it. I was tempted by the apple. Get it? Tempted by the apple. I had to do it, did I not? Was this not the fruit that started our fruity species onto the path it took? I'm sure my pal Lucifer would get the joke, even if you don't. As I reached an arm for the apple, 2 of the cherubs flew down to the apple, and they smiled at me, and one supported the fruit while another took out a small pair of secateurs from its wisp of clothing and cut the stem. They then both brought me the fruit to an outstretched hand. I took it, and they floated away about 2 feet away from me with, expectant faces. They floated. They must float because those little wings did wingy things, but there was no way those tiny wing things could have kept them in the sky. They managed to stay just out of reach as well. In my head, I imagined grabbing the one on the left and wrenching it apart and ripping its smilingly cute head off. The joy, the heaven. The little thing I imagined murdering smiled at me as I revelled in my thoughts and then shook its head, raising an admonishing finger. We'll see, I thought. A flash of doubt hit both Cupid's faces, and then little rancid smiles returned to the little faces. Ignoring the fluttering babies, I turned my focus to the apple. This apple was, well, the king of all apples, if apples had a king. It was huge and red and shiny. It looked like it had been buffed with a machine to that patent level leather of polishing levels. It also smelled of apples. No, not the smell of apples, the scent of apples that you imagine. Did this one have hints of cinnamon and custard? I wasn't smelling apples, I was smelling apple crumble and custard. Being the utter paranoid bastard I was, I kept my eyes on the little floating bastards as I considered the apple. Was it poisoned? I looked again at the little baby angels. One of them floated towards me and took a baby-sized knife from its baby-sized belt. It used the baby-sized knife to take a small chunk out of the apple. It then popped it into its mouth, chewed and gulped it down, nodding as it did so. In my mind, I imagined batting it out of the sky with a backhand. The thing's face changed for a moment, the smile was gone, and a face of worry was there as it got out of range and started smiling again. Both of the floaty creatures started to point and nod at the apples, so, as they say, when in heaven, do heavenly things, so I bit deep into the apple. Taste sensation. Honestly, the best thing I've ever had in my mouth, and that's saying something. I've had some meals from some of the best chefs in the world. I've eaten foods worldwide prepared by those who know how to make them. This apple was apple! This was not an apple, this was the apple. I chewed the crispy, crunchy apple and nodded my approval at the babies with wings. They nodded and I could see they were pleased with the result. They then showed me the road and motioned me to continue my journey to the gate. Wow, this was a very different approach to the city of Zion than the journey to Pandemonium. Fed and cared for in this journey, shown love. For fuck's sake. Also, unlike these roads to Pandemonium, there was no one else. The path to hell had been full of miserable humans. I mean, I could see for miles back down the road, and for the mile or so that I still had to go up the Golden Road, and there was no one but a few cupids floating around in the sky. I kept walking, eating my apple, and as I took my last bite, I wiped my hands and mouth and, unlike me, looked around for somewhere to put the apple core. Weird, but I didn't want to litter in heaven, so I was looking for a bin in heaven. A busy floaty baby came and motioned me to give him the car, which I did, and he flew off up the road. I eventually got within a few hundred yards of the gate and saw it for what it was. Well, if it was made from a single pearl like they said, I could believe it, but that was some massive oyster. These things were huge, 100 feet high and 200 feet wide, flipping cheeseburgers. The walls were of equal colossal size and layered with precious stones. A pattern stood out in each layer. Each layer held a name that was repeated and repeated with the intricately worked stones. The first layer was John, the next James. Oh, it was an advertisement hoarding for the apostles, of course. Eventually I got to the gates. At the base of the gate, on the right-hand side, was a small, tiny, messy desk with a keyboard and a computer that looked like it had come out in 1996. And of course, next to that computer was a printer of the same age. On the desk was a lot of paperwork, filed in the way the terminally busy file. What was important was at the top. The deeper you went into the pile, the less important the documents were. The truly stressed out and efficient seemed to always work in this style. On the edge of the desk was a dirty coffee mug that looked like it was the holy grail of whoever did this job, and that robust and rough coffee was the blessed waters that kept them functioning. The said coffee imbiber was a little man asleep face down on the desk now. His face was laid on its right side, and his drool had drained from his open, slightly snory mouth onto the top of the pile of old-fashioned printer paper that went along with the shitty dot matrix printer that was there. There was a bell on the desk that had a label, "Ring for Good Intentions," of course. And next to it, of course, was a humorous statue of a laughing angel with the linked written statement, "You don't have to be holy to work here, but it helps." I dinged the dinger and the man shot up. For a moment he was hidden by the papers that were stuck to the side of his face. It was wonderful to see. This was incredible entertainment. "Huh? Huh?" said the mixed up man, removing the papers from his face and returning them to the pile in front of him in a damp and crinkled state. The head that then was revealed was spherical. I've never seen a spherical head before. It was a definite human head, but it was spherical. It had all the human features. I mean, it was human-looking human, just sort of cartoonish in its qualities. The rounded head had a balding top with a crescent of hair that circled it. The hair from one side had been left a little bit long for that horrific comb-over of the British farces of the 50s. The man had little piggy eyes and a little piggy nose. I mean, it was almost literally a snout because I could see deep into his head through those nostrils that were now pointed at me. His moustache was toothbrush-like, and was it a moustache? It was perfectly maintained, of fine hair on his lip. He had pride in one thing, and that was that moustache. He looked at me myopically for a moment. I could see him shake off the sleepiness as he tried to bring himself back to normality from sleep. This was brilliant. I really wish that Fen had been here to see this. Was the man trying to establish a dialogue. Now, obviously, I could have helped him out at this point by starting the small talk train, but forget that. Let's see how quickly he can get himself back together. He placed his little round frame glasses on his face and leaned forward as he blinked me into focus. Hello, he stated. He then started mentally repeating something that he'd obviously learnt by rote. "Welcome to the holy city of Zion. You are now at the door to God's city, and as a Christian and as of a..." He looked at me questioningly. There was a pause as he nodded to me. "As a..." This was now a question. He looked left and right and brought his hand to his mouth. "Could I please request your pronoun?" he asked quietly. I looked at him. Goodness, I'm horrible, because he was going to have to work for this. "Yes, of course you can ask me for my pronoun," I told him, smiling. He waited. Time passed, and he started to get twitchy before he worked out what to do. I could see he was the usual person in customer services that you get everywhere, even in heaven. He was frustrated at people. "Ah, okay, I see. What is your pronoun?" he politely asked. "Oh, I will not answer your question, but you can ask," I told him, and smiled. He just sighed. He lifted his glasses to the top of his head and placed a palm on his forehead so he could put his elbows on the table. Now the guy had to work out if I was being a douchebag or if I was just terminally stupid. After a moment or two, he sighed again and continued. "Fair enough. It's everyone's right to withhold their pronouns, I suppose." He kind of spat the word right. I like that, so I decided to be a little bit more cooperative. "Don't worry about the speech, mate. I'm sure it's not necessary. I guess I'm in heaven," I said. He nodded. Things were getting easier. "Hello, I am Derek Jeffries," he said, offering me a hand to shake, which I looked at, knowing that it was covered in the drool puddle which had been created when he was asleep. He took the hand back and I noticed it wiped on his glowing white robe. He then went into work mode. "We just have to do some paperwork to get out of the way before you enter the kingdom of heaven," he said, turning to the keyboard and the green-screened monitor, and He started to type while pushing his glasses to a more comfortable and optically sound position and sitting there with his nose almost touching the screen.
Could I get your name, please?
He said, looking away from the said screen. William D. Beast, I told him. His fingers stopped there, hovering over the keyboard, and a nervous flash wiped over his face before he turned back to me and looked me in the eyes. Ah. His face, well, it kind of flashed with fear.
What angel brought you here?
He asked with a tremulous voice. I smiled as I could feel the man tense. At least I think he was a man. I couldn't remember an angel or a saint called Derek. The angel that brought me up? I repeated. I could see him cringe a little bit in fear now.
An angel did bring you, didn't they?
He carefully asked. Oh, yeah, an angel did, yes, I told him. I saw him relax and turn back to the screen. He pressed the return button and the printer burst into life as he started to hum a tune over its whine. I stared at him and then at the printer. He noticed and looked at me and smiled.
Oh, sorry about this, he said. This will only take a few moments, I promise.
Again he turned back to the screen. The printer kept printing and printing and printing, and guess what? Printing. After an extended amount of time, he stood up and he bent over the printer and checked it, raising his glasses and checking it again and checking its output. After considering it and looking confused, he sat back down and looked at the screen. He took his glasses off and, putting a temple tip from them in his mouth, he looked at me. He was going to do it. He was going to small talk me. He was thinking. I could see it. Here it came.
Was the journey here okay? Did you enjoy the apple?
He asked. I nodded. He nodded back and looked at the printer quickly, which was still printing, and then back at me via looking at the place on his arm where there evidently should have been a watch.
Sorry, this normally doesn't take this long. This is just a small list of sins that must be absolved before entering. Don't worry, even the best have had a few, he reassured. Even Mother Teresa had a couple.
He nodded. The printer clattered on as time went on. The pile of printed material was building. The man put his specs back on and stood to check the now large pile. He seemed a lot confused as to why it was so large. He sat back down at the paper-littered desk and started straightening things like out of habit. I decided to talk. Have you had a busy day then? He looked up and smiled.
Not very, to be honest. State of the model world, I'm afraid. Not many of the faithful follow our dictates properly,
I nodded and went back to waiting. The man had to, at one point, put more paper in the printer. Eventually he came back to me and started to apologise.
I'm afraid there must be some kind of mistake here, sir, he said.
Call me Will, don't call me sir, it's fine, I told him. He nodded, but looked like he was full of questions.
Out of interest, though, which angel did bring you up the stairway?
He asked. Oh, I didn't come on a stairway, I was brought up in an elevator, I told him. He looked confused, but nodded.
Oh, okay, not heard of that before, but things do change so quickly here. But who was the angel, do you remember?
I looked at him. I was so looking forward to seeing this reaction. They were lovely and so welcoming, I told him, lengthening the tension. I could see he wanted me to get to the point, so me being me, I lollygagged about it. He waited patiently, but eventually could not wait anymore and spoke.
Yes, that is kind of what angels are like, really nice. I suppose it's just part of being angelic. But did they give you a name? Was it Joe File, perhaps? He tends to be a little lazy about the old paperwork.
He asked. No, it definitely wasn't Joe File, I told him, trying to portray a person trying to portray remembering a name.
Asriel?
He exclaimed. I considered this. I repeated the name several times under my breath and shook my head at him. No, it wasn't that. I would remember that name, I said. He was now getting frustrated, so I thought I would just land the name and see what happened. Oh, that was it, yeah. Lucifer. That was it. Lucifer Morningstar, the Lightbringer. That was what they said they were called, I told the little man. The man, saint, celestial being, whatever, froze, and after a considered pause, acted like he'd misheard. He could not have heard that name, could he?
Pardon? You must have heard that name wrong, I'm afraid,
he told me. No, she was definitely called Lucifer Morningstar. I leaned forward in a conspirational manner, and behind the back of my hand, I whispered to him, "She was gorgeous, though. I mean, like 11 out of 10. So hot." I winked and leant away from him. It was one of my life's best shows, watching the man's thoughts flash across his face. Firstly, the jaw dropped open. Then he frowned in disbelief. Then his face twitched into that half-faced torsion that is a maybe. And then there was that moment of oh shit, what if? Then a poker face hid what I could smell, the fear. Wonderful. The man smiled at me, a false, fear-filled, fantastic, fucked-up facial failing. He looked at the printer that was now actually ink-free and paper-free. It had run out and was printing, but printing nothing. Gosh, the feeling of awkwardness and discomfort was palpable. It gave me goosebumps. So fun. He eventually lifted an index finger to provide me with the worldwide sign of "give me a moment." He then reached down to his drawer and pulled out a red phone. It was a proper red phone from the 70s, coily wire and everything. He lifted the handset, still holding the finger to me.
Just bear with me a moment.
His voice trembled. In a squeaky voice, he spoke into the phone.
Hi. This is, Derek at Gate 7. Just wondered if I could have a member of senior management down here, please. I have a gentleman here who needs your attention.
He was tapping his fingers at the phone's side while waiting for a reply. Oh, this seemed like it was going to be hellish fun. Thanks for listening. That's the end of the episode. Please go back and listen to the other episodes. Please share. Please like. Please review. There are some brilliant links in the description if you want to go down there and meet like-minded people in places such as the Facebook group and things. Just go there and talk to random people who are randomly into this show, as hopefully you are now. Thanks for listening, and of course, God bless you.
Brought to you in association with Grendel Press. This is Werewolf the Podcast, a serial killer drama.